Okay, so you want to own a casino. Picture it. The floor stretches out in front of you like an ocean of red carpet and gold trim, and every few seconds a machine somewhere lights up and sings that little jackpot melody. The chandeliers throw soft light on rows of felt tables. Somewhere a cocktail waitress is carrying a tray of free drinks, and somewhere else a man in a good suit is pushing a stack of chips into the middle of a table, and the whole room seems to lean in with him. You imagine standing on a balcony above all of it, watching the money move. The house always wins, right? You've heard that your whole life. You've seen it in the movies. Own the house, and you never lose. That's the picture. That's the daydream. A machine that turns human hope into cash 24 hours a day, and you own the machine. Here's what the daydream leaves out. That ocean of a floor costs more per square foot to run than almost any other kind of building on Earth. The lights never go off, the air conditioning never stops, and neither does the payroll. Before a single tourist walks through your doors, you may have already spent enough to build a hospital, and you owe most of that money to a bank that does not care how lucky you feel. The free drinks aren't generosity, they're a line item. The pretty carpet was chosen by a consultant who studies how patterns keep people from looking at the exits. And the phrase, "the house always wins," the one you've been repeating your whole life, is one of the most misunderstood sentences in all of business, because the house doesn't win the way you think it does. The house isn't gambling at all. And the moment you understand what a casino is actually selling, this entire building starts to make a different kind of sense. So let's take the daydream apart, piece by piece, and put a real business back together in its place. Because owning a casino is one of the most romanticized things a person can imagine owning, and almost nobody outside the industry understands how the money actually moves. Not the money you see on the tables, the money underneath. Start with the thing every fantasy skips, the cost of walking in the door. And here you have to split the world in two, because there are really two completely different businesses hiding under the same word. There's the small casino, a regional operation, a card room, a modest gaming floor attached to a hotel in a mid-sized market. And there's the destination resort, the kind that anchors a strip in a major gambling city. These are not the same animal, they are barely the same species. A smaller regional casino might get built, licensed, and opened somewhere in the tens of millions of dollars, depending on the market and how much hotel and restaurant you bolt onto it. That already sounds like a fortune, and it is. But it's the entry-level version, the mega resorts, the ones with the fountains and the towers and the names you'd recognize. Those run into the billions, not millions. Billions with a B. Some of the largest integrated resorts ever built have cost in the range of several $billion each, and that's before the doors ever open and before a single chip is sold. Where does that money go? Not mostly to the gaming floor, strangely. The slot machines and the tables are almost the cheapest part of the whole enterprise. The money goes into the building. The concrete, the steel, the hotel rooms stacked 40 stories high, the theaters, the ballrooms, the restaurants, the pools, the parking structures big enough to swallow a small town. A modern destination casino is a hotel and a shopping mall and a concert venue and a convention center that happen to have a gaming floor in the middle. The gaming floor is the reason the whole thing exists, but by square footage and by dollars spent, it's often a minority of the building. And then there's the part of the cost that never shows up in the photographs at all, the license. You cannot simply decide to open a casino the way you'd open a coffee shop. Gambling is one of the most heavily regulated industries in existence. To operate legally, you need a gaming license from a state or tribal or national authority, and getting one is a years-long ordeal of background checks, financial disclosures, and regulatory scrutiny that reaches into every corner of your finances and your history. In some jurisdictions, the number of licenses is strictly capped. The government has decided that only a handful will ever exist, which means a license itself becomes an asset worth enormous sums, sometimes worth more than the building it's attached to. You're not just buying land and concrete, you're buying permission. And permission, in this business, is the scarcest thing there is. So already the fantasy is bending. You imagined a money machine. What you're actually looking at is one of the most capital-intensive, most heavily regulated, most operationally complex businesses a private company can run. Now, here's the problem that quietly kills the naive owner, and it's the same problem that kills mall owners and hotel owners and cruise line owners, anybody who owns a very expensive building. That building has to be paid for, and almost nobody pays for a casino in cash. The typical way these things get financed leans heavily on debt. Often the majority of the capital comes from borrowed money, with the owners putting up a smaller slice of equity. That's normal for big real estate. It's how the game is played. But it means that from the day the doors open, there is a clock running. Every single day, the interest accrues. Every single day, whether the floor is packed or empty, whether it's New Year's Eve or a dead Tuesday in February, the debt wants to be fed. And that changes everything about how you have to think about this business. Because it means the enemy of a casino is not a lucky gambler. The enemy of a casino is an empty room. Let that sink in, because it runs against everything the movies taught you. In the films, the tension is always about the whale, the high roller who walks in, sits down at the private table, and threatens to break the house with a single impossible night. The pit boss sweats. The eye in the sky zooms in. The owner watches from behind the glass, terrified that one man's hot streak could bring the whole empire down. It's dramatic. It's also, for a real casino of any meaningful size, almost entirely fiction. Here's the strange part. A modern casino does not fear the winner. It has already done the math on the winner. It knows, down to a fraction of a percent, how the numbers behave over millions of bets, and it knows that individual luck, even spectacular once-in-a-decade luck, is just noise on a line that always trends the same direction. What a casino fears is not the person who wins too much. It's the person who never comes in at all, because that beautiful, expensive, debt-laden building doesn't care whether you had a good month. The interest is due either way. The staff still need paying either way. The lights, the air conditioning, the thousands of machines humming in the dark, all of it costs money whether there's a body in the seat or not. An empty casino is not a business at rest, it's a business bleeding. So now we arrive at the reframe, the single sentence that reorganizes this entire building in your mind. You think a casino makes money by taking money from gamblers. It doesn't. Not really. A casino is a machine for converting a crowd into time, and time into small, statistically guaranteed profits. That's the entire logic in one sentence. It is not in the business of winning bets. It is in the business of keeping the floor full and keeping people playing, because every minute a person spends playing is a minute the math works in the house's favor. The profit doesn't come from the size of any single bet. It comes from the sheer volume of bets, multiplied across thousands of people across thousands of hours, grinding out a tiny, relentless edge that never sleeps and never has a bad night over a long enough stretch. That edge has a name. In the industry, they call it the house edge, or the hold. On a game like American Roulette, the presence of those green zero pockets means that over time the house keeps a few cents on every dollar wagered, somewhere in the mid-single-digit percentages. On certain slot machines, the hold might be higher. On a well-played hand of blackjack, it can be far lower, sometimes barely over 1% for the sharpest players. The exact figure varies enormously by game and by jurisdiction, and any casino operator will tell you the number they actually care about isn't the theoretical edge printed in a math textbook. It's the realized hold, what the floor actually keeps at the end of the day, after real people play real games in real, imperfect ways. And here's what makes it work. The edge is small, but it is patient, and it is applied to an astonishing volume of money. A single roulette table, spinning a few dozen times an hour day after day, moves more cash across its felt in a year than most small businesses see in a decade. Multiply that by a floor full of tables and a wall of machines, and the tiny edge becomes an ocean. Which is why the whole design of the place, every carpet pattern, every absent clock, every winding path that never quite lets you walk in a straight line to the exit, is engineered toward a single goal: Keep you inside, keep you comfortable, keep you playing. The longer you stay, the more bets you make, and the more bets you make, the more certainly the math collects its small, inevitable tax. That's why the drinks come free at the tables in many places. That's why the buffet is cheap and the room comps are generous and the parking is free and the entertainment is subsidized. None of that is charity. Every one of those free things is a tool for extending your visit and increasing what the industry calls your time on device, the minutes you spend actively wagering. A casino would rather lose money on your dinner than lose the 2 hours you'd have spent playing if you'd left the building to eat somewhere else. And this is where the reframe deepens into something almost counterintuitive. The most valuable customer to a large casino is very often not the reckless gambler who blows a fortune in one wild night and never returns. It's the steady, moderate player who comes back again and again, the retiree who visits every Thursday, the couple who drives in one weekend a month, the local who plays the same 3 machines every payday. Their individual losses are modest, but they are reliable, and reliability is the thing that pays down debt. This is why casinos pour enormous resources into loyalty programs, the players' cards, the tiered rewards, the point systems that track exactly what you play, how long you play, and how much you're worth over a lifetime. That card in your wallet is not a courtesy, it's a data collection instrument, and behind it sits an entire analytics operation, whose only job is to understand your value to the building and to nudge you gently, precisely, toward coming back one more time. So the money isn't really coming off the tables in the way you pictured. It's coming off the crowd. It's coming off occupancy, off frequency, off the disciplined harvesting of a small edge from a very large number of people over a very long time. And once you see it that way, you understand why a casino operator lies awake at night worrying about foot traffic the way a mall owner worries about vacancy. Because for both of them, the building is only an expense, and the people walking through it are the only thing that turns that expense into a business. Which brings us to the next question, the one that separates the operators who survive from the ones who quietly hand their keys to the bank. Exactly how full does that floor have to be, and for how long before the whole thing tips from bleeding into profit? Here's the survival math, and it's less glamorous than anything in the fantasy. A casino floor is not a treasure chest. It's a factory with an enormous fixed cost of simply being open. Think about what has to run whether one person is playing or 1,000. The lights, the air handling that keeps a windowless room from feeling like a cave. The surveillance system, hundreds of cameras monitored around the clock by people watching for cheating, for theft, for the dealer who palms a chip and the player who's counting cards. The dealers themselves standing at tables that may sit empty at 3 in the afternoon. Security, cage staff counting cash, cleaning crews, compliance officers filing the paperwork that gambling regulators demand. All of that burns money every single hour in a good week and a bad one, whether the floor is packed or dead. So the operator's world divides into 2 brutal categories. There's the cost of the doors being open, and there's the revenue that only shows up when bodies are in the seats. And the gap between those 2 things is where survival is decided. On a slow Tuesday, that gorgeous floor is a liability, hemorrhaging payroll and electricity, while the win from a handful of quiet players doesn't come close to covering it. On a busy Saturday night, the same floor prints money because the fixed costs are already paid and every additional bet is almost pure margin. That's the entire logic in one sentence. The casino makes almost nothing until it covers its fixed costs, and then it makes almost everything, which is why occupancy, the number of active players multiplied by the hours they stay, is the single most important figure in the building. Not the size of the biggest win, not the flashiest jackpot. Occupancy. It's the same math a hotel runs, the same math an airline runs. The seat, the room, the machine, they're perishable inventory. An empty blackjack table at midnight is a loss you can never recover, exactly like an empty airplane seat at takeoff. The game that isn't being played is money that will never exist, and so the entire operation bends toward one goal above all others. Keep the floor full, keep it full longer, and keep the same people coming back to fill it again next week. Now layer in the part that makes casino economics genuinely precarious, the part the neon hides. Most large casinos are not paid for in cash. They're built on borrowed money, and a lot of it. The typical structure for a big resort involves substantial debt, often the majority of the project financed by lenders and bondholders, with the owner's own equity making up a smaller slice. That leverage is what lets someone build a billion-dollar property in the first place. But leverage is a double-edged blade. On the way up, when the floor is full and the win is steady, borrowed money magnifies your returns beautifully. On the way down, it does the opposite with terrifying speed, because the debt payments don't care how your Tuesday went. The interest comes due on schedule, in a boom and in a bust, and it comes due in numbers large enough to make a full parking lot feel like the bare minimum rather than a triumph. So picture the operator's real balance sheet. Every month there's a mountain of fixed cost. The staff, the utilities, the surveillance, the regulatory overhead. And on top of that mountain sits the debt service, the steady drumbeat of payments to the people who financed the dream. Against all of that, the operator has exactly one weapon: gaming win, extracted a few percent at a time from a crowd that has to keep showing up. The margin between what comes in and what must go out is often thinner than the glittering exterior would ever suggest. A great year buries the difference under so much volume that nobody notices how much of the win was already spoken for. A bad year exposes it instantly, and there's nowhere to hide, because you cannot simply close half the floor to save money. A half-empty casino signals decline, chases away the very foot traffic you depend on, and starts a spiral that's brutally hard to reverse. And here's the strange part about that spiral. The business is exquisitely sensitive to attendance, and attendance is exquisitely sensitive to things the operator does not control. A slowing economy and the discretionary dollars people once spent on a weekend at the tables simply vanish, because gambling, for the vast majority of visitors, is entertainment, and entertainment is the first line item cut when household budgets tighten. A competitor opening a newer, shinier property 20 minutes down the road, and suddenly your steady Thursday retiree is someone else's steady Thursday retiree. A new law legalizing gambling in a neighboring state, and the customers who once drove 3 hours to reach you now have a casino in their own backyard. A public health crisis that empties every public space at once, and a business whose entire model is putting large numbers of people shoulder to shoulder for hours discovers exactly how fragile occupancy really is. That last one isn't hypothetical, and it's worth sitting with because it revealed the machinery in a way nothing else could. When gaming floors across the country went dark for extended stretches, the fixed costs and the debt payments did not go dark with them. The buildings still had to be maintained, insured, secured, and financed, while the one thing that fed the whole system, people in the seats, dropped to zero overnight. Operators burned through cash reserves at a staggering rate. Some renegotiated with lenders, some furloughed thousands of workers, and the properties that survived best were, tellingly, not always the flashiest. They were the ones that had gone in with less debt, more cushion, and a more disciplined view of exactly how thin the real margin was. It was a live demonstration of the truth every operator already knew, but preferred not to dwell on. That a casino's greatest strength, its ability to convert a massive crowd into a reliable river of small losses, is also its single point of failure. Because the moment the crowd stops walking through the doors, the entire mathematical certainty you built the business on becomes worthless. The odds are still in your favor. There's just nobody left to play them. So let's put the whole machine back together now, because you've seen every gear, and it's time to see how they turn as one. You wanted to own a casino because you imagined the house always wins. And technically, that's true. On a long enough timeline, with enough hands dealt, the math is unbeatable. But here's the reframe that reorganizes everything you've watched for the last half hour. A casino doesn't make money by beating gamblers. A casino makes money by staying open long enough for the math to happen. That's the entire logic in one sentence. The edge is real, but the edge is small, and a small edge only compounds into a fortune if you can keep the doors open, the lights on, and the crowd walking through, day after day after day, for years. The house doesn't win the night. The house wins the decade. And everything difficult about owning one comes down to surviving the gap in between. That's why the real operators stopped thinking of themselves as gambling businesses a long time ago. Walk the numbers of a modern integrated resort, and you'll find that the gaming floor, the thing you thought you were buying, is often no longer the largest slice of revenue. The rooms, the restaurants, the shows, the shopping, the conventions filling the place midweek when no tourist would come. In many of the biggest properties, the non-gaming side now brings in more than the tables and machines combined. The casino stopped being the business and became the anchor tenant, the loss leader amenity that pulls the crowd through the door so every other register in the building can ring. You didn't buy a place where people gamble. You bought a machine for manufacturing foot traffic, and gambling is just the most profitable thing you can sell that traffic once it's inside. Which brings us all the way back to the survival math, the unglamorous number that quietly decides who keeps their casino and who hands it to the bank. It was never the win percentage. The win percentage takes care of itself. It's the coverage. How many times over your operating cash flow can pay the interest on your debt, month after month, through the bad quarters as well as the good ones. Go in with modest leverage and a fat cushion, and a slow year is a disappointment you absorb. Go in stretched to the last dollar, betting that next year's crowd will bail out this year's loan. And a slow year is not a disappointment. It's a funeral. The gambler at your tables is playing against the odds. The owner is playing against the calendar, and the calendar never busts. Here's the part almost nobody sees, standing in that ringing, windowless room with no clocks on the walls. You think the design is there to keep the gambler inside. It is, but it's also a confession. Every one of those tricks, the maze layout, the perpetual daylight, the free drinks, the loyalty card tracking every dollar you feed the machine, exists because the edge on any single visit is so thin that the house needs volume, repetition, and time to make it real. The casino isn't confident. The casino is patient. It has done the arithmetic, and it knows that if it can just keep you playing, keep the crowd flowing, keep the doors open through the droughts, the math will do the rest. The glamour is a delivery system for patience. And that's the whole business, laid bare. The chandeliers and the high roller suites and the fountains out front are not where the money is. They're the bait. The money is in the boredom, in the retiree feeding coins on a Tuesday afternoon, in the 0.1% that the machine holds on every spin, in the discipline of an operator who resisted the temptation to borrow $1 more than the crowd could safely repay. The fantasy sells you the jackpot. The reality is a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet is beautiful only if you have the nerve and the balance sheet to wait for it. None of this means owning a casino is a guaranteed fortune, and none of it means it's a guaranteed grave. The romance is real. These places genuinely can print money, and some of the wealthiest, most durable businesses in the world are built on exactly this model. But the economics are unforgiving, and the line between a monument and a ruin isn't luck or location or the roll of the dice. It's leverage and patience, and a clear-eyed respect for how quickly a river of small wins dries up when the crowd stops coming. The people who thrive in this business aren't the ones who love the action. They're the ones who love the arithmetic, and who understand, in their bones, that the whole glittering machine rests on one quiet, ruthless truth. The house always wins, but only if the house can afford to wait. So here's what I want to know from you. If someone handed you the keys to a casino tomorrow, free and clear, no debt, no strings, would you keep it as a gambling floor and squeeze every 0.1% out of the tables? Or would you do what the smartest operators quietly did years ago and turn it into a hotel and entertainment complex that just happens to have a casino attached? Tell me which version of the business you'd actually want to own and why. I read the comments, and I genuinely want to hear how you'd play the hand. And if there's another romanticized asset you want taken apart the same way, a stadium, a nightclub, a marina, a private island, drop it below. Because the fantasy is always louder than the math, and the math is always the better story.